family conversation, one of the things that Steph and I wanted to talk about, that we're getting ready to kind of step out in faith in, is as you see these amazing kiddos stepping out and going to their own experience. We love having them in here in worship, but we also know that this type of worship isn't necessarily catered to their age group. And so here in the next little bit, we're going to get ready to kind of step out and start having our own kids worship experience. And so we're gearing up for that. And you're like, how in the world are you going to do that? Trust me, we are amazing with facilities. You will be surprised at what we could do. And so we're going to have their own worship experience. So they will be checked in at the beginning of services, and then they will get to worship on their own. They'll have their own space for that. They will have their own message, their own whole thing, and then they'll go to small group time. And so as God continues to add to the church, we get to add these really amazing, exciting things, because we truly believe that kids just aren't something you can put off in a corner that need to have babysitting so we adults can have adult time here. No, actually, they're the future generation of leaders, and we want to make sure that we pour into them all that God has in store for them now so they don't go through those wandering years in their life. And so we're really looking forward to it. And with that, I would say this. If you have a heart for kids ministries, it's something that's always been on your heart. I love kids, love serving kids, things like that. Maybe you don't know what that even means, and you'd be like, hey, I'm willing to sign up blindly. Please, we love that. But we would love to sit down and have a conversation with you and what that means further, because I truly believe what we're getting ready to go into is some of the funnest years for our kids when they get to actually experience the presence of God, worship Him on their own, have songs that are more geared towards their age group, and I'll just tell you this much. My wife's pretty good at it, so she's going to do a great job. All right? Awesome. Well, we're going to jump into the Word this morning. How many had a great time last week with Pastor Mark that was here? Come on, it was a good time. If you weren't here, you can check that message out on the YouTube channel. We started putting our videos and sermons up on YouTube now. You just go to Heart Church on YouTube. It's a great place to just check out things. Maybe you're gone for a week. That's awesome. Make sure you take vacations and time away, but also make sure you stay up to speed with what's going on. Last week's message was incredible. Pastor Mark never disappoints. And if you don't know who Pastor Mark is, he is my and Stephanie's pastor. He also serves on the eldership board of this church. And so he pastors a church all the way up in Portland, Oregon. He used to be my former boss, but he sent us here to plant the church. And so we had him come down and preach for the weekend. It was fantastic. And just my high points on the weekend were simply this. One, we all worship something, right? Whether it be our finances, our bank account, our marriage, the sports team, or whatever it is. But we all worship something. We become like what we worship, right? So as you worship that thing, you begin to act and emulate that very thing. And number 3 is we were created to worship something. And so as we go into this third week, I really want to kind of summarize not only what Pastor Mark talked about, but even the week before what my wife was talking about. And it really takes both of those kind of foundational understandings to understand with where I'm going today. With where I'm going today is we have a church that's only 6 months old. And everything is brand new. Brand new today, we have people in the second level. Come on, I told you, church. I said if everybody came on a Sunday, we'd actually put people on there. But it just so happened this weekend, so thank you for being here. It's awesome. But putting those 2 weeks together, of what it is to fall in love with God and understand what it means for God's love to restore us and heal us as she walked through Peter's life and that restoration journey that she talked about with him. And then talking about what Pastor Mark talked about is that we are a church that worships on Sunday morning, but it needs to go beyond that, right? It needs to go through Monday, through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, into the next week. But what does it look like as a church when we come together? Like I said, we're only 6 months old. And everything is brand new. How we do this, what we do, every week it feels like something is a little bit different. So it's like, when are you going to land on something? Well, what my hope and my purpose for this message today is to give permission, set expectation, and build a culture for what our Sunday morning worship experiences are going to be like. Because I think if you don't know what to do, you will do the very least, right? You walk into a place and you're like, this is a school. They eat lunch here on Monday through Friday. It's kind of weird to be worshiping Jesus in this place. And I'll be honest, I'm with you on that. I get it. But our hope is that you walk into this place and you feel and you experience the presence of God, and you find that it's a place that you can worship and worship comfortably. So one, as we wrap up this series over the next couple weeks, I think it's important to recognize the place that corporate worship plays in the life of the believer. And to understand this, we need to take the last 2 weeks' messages, like I said, to truly understand what God desires from us when we come together. We need to regularly ask God to give a fresh revelation of his love. And number two, we need to not let worship be relegated to a 2-hour slot on Sunday mornings. If we let the redemptive work of God in our lives become old news, we will ruin the opportunity that we have to experience him afresh and new. And we will become just like the children of Israel in the wilderness. This is the part of that story that blows my mind the most. Is they get out in the wilderness and they're hungry and they're thirsty. And they go to Moses and they say, it was better that we were slaves. And they forget that they're walking in freedom. But they get their eyes off of their freedom and they put it back on the past. But we can't become like that and look at our past. Don't let what God has set you free from become something that you wander back into. God set you free because you were created to worship. And when we are bound up, we can't worship God as freely as we are made to. You see, the root of worship is this. It's God's love. Without God's love, we have an inability to worship him. And we need to have that revelation, not only that he's a good God and a big God and a powerful God and worthy of all praise and all of those things, but also the personal work that's been done inside of us. Those addictions he set you free from. That mindset, that old way of thinking, that constant routine of getting up and falling down and getting up and falling down and getting up and falling down. He set you free. He forgave your sins. And that alone should cause us to stand in gratitude and in awe and in wonder. So people ask this question, because if you just want to get down to the nitty-gritty of it all, they ask this question, so why do we worship in church? Or better yet, why do we sing these songs in church? Is it just like routine? Is it like warm up for the pastor so he has a few more minutes to get ready to remember all of his notes or anything like that? Actually, there's multiple reasons, but I want to start with these. The first one is this, is that we worship in church to set our priorities straight. We want to make sure that we go, okay, you're God, I'm not. You're an authority, I'm the one that's going to do what you say. I'm going to listen, or you're going to speak, and I'm going to obey. We worship in church to get our hearts ready for the word. Because I'll tell you what, sometimes, and the word promises this, is that this cuts kind of deep. Sometimes we don't like to hear what this word has to say. And that's okay, but the worship and listening and singing and opening our mouths and raising our hands and lifting our voice gets our soul ready. It gets our heart, our mind, our will, and emotions out of the place of the routine of Monday through Friday, get up, go to work, do my routine, get home, have dinner with my family, spend a few minutes on my hobbies, and then go to bed. Get up and go to, like that routine is can become humdrum. And worship helps us to focus on him. We worship in church to give God honor, respect, and admiration. We worship in church because the Bible said we should give thanks to the Lord simply because he's good. And we worship in church because it's good for us. It sets us straight. Corporate worship has a special place in the life of a believer. And it's different from every other day, because the list that I just read to you, someone can sit here and I will agree with them. They go, well, I can do that in my bedroom. You're absolutely correct, and you should. You should spend time in his presence, worshiping him in your car, wherever it is, because it can do all of those things. But corporate worship is a bit different. And that it's time where we learn to walk in unity with one another and with the authority that he's been given to the church as a body as a whole. Matthew 18:19 through 20 says this. And it says, again, truly I tell you, if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Next part of that, it says, for where two or three are gathered in your name, there I am. And if you go back to that verse, you can see right there, it says where you agree. And agree simply is just unity. There's a coming together. And the thing about unity is it doesn't actually start to happen until there's disagreement. And I guarantee you, if you pulled the room in here, we would all come from different walks of life and different philosophies and maybe even different theologies or doctrines, maybe different worldviews, maybe different political worldviews. But it's in that moment when we decide, you are the King of Kings, you are the Lord of Lords, you deserve my worship no matter what, that we come into unity together. And there is an anointing that comes upon that unity that happens unlike any other place in the world. Psalms 133 says, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil pouring on the head and running down the beard and running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar and on his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon was falling on the Mount Zion, for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. So when we come together and we decide that despite all of our potential differences, there is one who's worthy of our worship. And we lift our hands, and we raise our voice, and we sing, and we come into agreement, and we do all the things that, what seems to be behavior unification. It's actually a form of unity of worship. So let's go into this maybe just a little bit more. What's the difference between corporate worship and individual expression? Again, like I said, I want to give permission. I want to set some boundaries. I want to give clarity. I want to show you guys some things. The question is it biblical, and does it line up with what the church is doing? So when we come into church and we're talking about expressions, we're talking about lifting of hands, talking about raising voice, singing, clapping, dancing, all the things, and we'll go through those in a minute. The question comes is, what's appropriate? And the first response is this: is it biblical? Do you find it in the Bible? Because I guarantee you, I've been around church long enough, there's a lot of people that things that people do in church, and you go like, I actually don't think that's Bible. And that's okay. They just need to understand that what they're doing is for themselves, and it's not worship. It's just behavior that they like and like to express. The question then you also have to is, will this honor God? With what I'm doing, will it honor God? Or is it self-serving? Does it make me feel better? Because that's the difficulty between the two, right? Like, we're trying to come into unity, but we've got to make sure that we're not trying to do our own thing and lift ourselves up or try to have our own experience. And will it add to the worship atmosphere? So in this moment, when we're singing and lifting our hands and worshiping and doing all the things that we do, is it adding to the atmosphere, or is it putting the attention upon myself? We have to have this conversation with musicians all the time, because it's like, hey, you probably need to be a little bit quieter. And they're like, well, I'm like giving it my all. I'm like, I know you are, but you're all that we can hear, Like, play in unity, work in unity, be in unity, because in unity there comes that blessing. Distracting expressions can cause the whole church to stop worshiping, right? And people, this is my favorite one. Like, people go, but like, David said, I'll become more undignified than this. And you're like, yeah, actually, you're right. He did. But you got to remember, David was in charge. He was setting the culture. He was setting the standard. And actually, back in that time, the whole idea of worship was hyper-religious. Sit up, stand down, offer this sacrifice, wave this thing in front of the altar, wash your hands this way, do those things. And David was trying to give a New Testament example of what worship was to an Old Testament mindset. And so when we get in that place, we're like, I'll become more undignified. Well, maybe you will, but not in here. And that's okay. You can go do that and have that place and be that place on your own. But what we're doing is we're trying to get into unity. We're trying to find that blessing. We're trying to find that anointing. So the question then I get all the time is why do some churches have highly expressive worship and some churches don't do anything at all? They sit and it's like liturgical quiet, maybe there's somebody droning a hymn or something like that. And where's the balance between that? What's that look like? And I'll just say this. You have to go back to what I said in the beginning. Is it biblical? Do I think that sitting, waiting in silence is worship? Absolutely. Do I think that raising hands and singing and shouting and dancing and all those things? Yes, because it's biblical. It's what you find in the Bible. So why do some churches? Well, some churches decide that they want to have an expression of worship that's a little different than others. And I am, as a pastor, just so you know, I never look at a church and go, I don't think they're doing it right. Because it's not for me to decide where that direction of that church is going to go. That's on the pastor, and that's on the team that God has placed there. But for us as Heart Church, we're a church that loves to worship. I know we're only 6 months in, we're new, we're fresh, but we love God's presence. We love to sing. We love to get out there and just give it everything and our all. And the last question in this part of the unity part is, and I think this is one of the things that I think sometimes we forget to think about, is that oftentimes unsaved people or visitors will come into your building and they'll have an experience, whether it be like, man, they don't move. Like that, like are any of them alive? They're checking pulses, like things are going on. Or they're so overtly expressive that you're like, I don't know what to do here. Like do I sit, clap, dance, sting? Like what is it? Do I, touch my toes and do-si-do and go all around? But no, the visitor needs to be thought of in mind. And just so you know, Steph and I think about this regularly. It's one of the reasons why we always offer salvation at the end of our messages. Because we want to give an opportunity that those that don't know Jesus yet to accept him as his Lord and Savior. It's also the reason that we think through that grid when it comes to our facilities and things like that. But it's also something we think of when it comes to worship. What songs do we sing? Are they extremely confusing and you wouldn't even know the words that you're singing? Are they something that actually honors God, or is it more inwardly focused? There's so many things that we think through. And we want to make sure that we build an atmosphere. Heart Church, we're building an atmosphere where God's presence is welcome and the visitor doesn't feel like an outcast. We want people to know that he's here, because if I'm being honest with you, without his presence, we might as well just go be another self-help group. Because only there is a place where we all think that actually something's happening when nothing really is. Because God's presence, in his presence, is what transforms us. In his presence, we have our mindsets changed. In his presence, he does healings and miracles and things like that. So what are appropriate expressions of worship in Heart Church? And we're just going to go through these really quick. There's 9 forms of them in the Bible. So you'll find these all throughout the Bible, but mostly what I'm going to draw from today is that I'm going to draw from the book of Psalms. 3 of them have to do with your spoken voice. And the first one is speaking. Speaking is worship? Yeah, I can actually sit here and go, man, God is so good. He's so great. He's amazing. What a wonderful, he saved my wretched soul. He set me free from addictions and from my, that is actually giving God worship. And it says in Psalms 31:1, it says, I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. Number 2 is shouting. And I think we've all been in a place where you've got that one guy that's just like, he's a shouter. You got the shouter in church, and it's a little uncomfortable. If he times it wrong, everybody looks at him and things like that. But there is a unified shout. When a worship leader says, get God to shout a praise at the end of the song, what he's not looking for is a round of applause because he did a good job. What he's looking for is to lead you in an act of worship that says, God, you're so good. And sometimes it just comes out as an audible, yeah! Because you just don't have the words to say, and that's okay. That's all right. But there's a unity in that, and the leaders of the church will help you understand the right time and the right place to do those things. Psalms 27:6 says, Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me at his tabernacle, and will I sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Number 3, the last thing that we do with our voices, we sing. This is probably the most common thing that we do at church, is singing. Psalms 47:6 says, Sing praise to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises. And I'm just going to be honest with you, and I love you all, but there's some of us that sing well, and there's some of us that make a joyful noise. And I think being a little self-aware is a good thing, right? I used to go to a church when I was growing up where it was actually my father-in-law was the pastor. And if you watch this father-in-law online, I love you, just know that. But he didn't like the volume to be loud because he loved to hear himself sing. And he wasn't bad, but the problem was not everybody's good. And so one time he comes to me and he says, Trevin, who is hollering in church? And I go, hollering? And I go, I'm sorry, I don't know. He goes, you got to listen. There's a hollerer behind me. And I go, what are you talking about, a holler? He goes, there's just somebody who can't sing, but they just yell the whole time during worship. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm on the drums today because I can't hear that because all I hear is what's in my ears. But singing is something that we all participate in. And maybe you don't know the words of the songs, and maybe you don't listen to that necessarily that type of worship music or something like that. But I would just encourage you that if Heart Church is your family, and you don't necessarily know all the words of the songs, come and have a conversation with me. I'd love to load your playlist. I'd love to give you a bunch of songs that where we're going as a church that you can help get in unity with us. And that way when you come on Sunday morning, you're not like, sing a little louder, like hoping you get the next word. And thank God that song doesn't have any words in it except sing a little louder. But like the other songs that we do, you're like, what in the world are we singing? Help lead the church by knowing the lyrics of the song. The next thing that we get to do with worship is it has to do with our posture, where we position our bodies. And number one, and we haven't done this yet in Heart Church, but it's something that I know we will do in time, it's bowing. There's something very spiritual about bowing. Now, I'm real tall, and I got back and knee problems, so bowing looks like sitting in a seat sometimes for me. And as we get older, that's a reality. Sometimes you just can't do the physical ability of bowing. But there's something very spiritual about bowing in the presence of God, giving honor and worship. Psalms 95:6 says, come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. Bowing, number one, with our posture. Number two, standing. When we say stand for worship, it's not because we don't want to feel awkward like you're sitting there at a concert watching us. No, it's actually like, hey, this is a part of worship. I'm going to stand in the presence of my God. It's a sign of honor and respect. Like when the president comes into a room, everybody stands to attention. When the bride gets ready to walk down the aisle, you stand to attention because it's a place of honor. I'm going to get out of my comfort zone. I'm going to be maybe a little uncomfortable for 20 minutes. I'm going to sing. I'm going to worship. And I'm going to worship by simply just standing. It's one of the forms of worship. It says, my flesh trembles in fear of you. I stand in awe of your laws. That's Psalm 119, 120. Number three, our posture, dancing. Now, I don't get to be off the stage very much, but you get to see me lead worship, and I'm not like a concrete feat, if you notice that about me. I like to move, and I like to get into the worship because there's something about what I do with my body that literally reminds my soul, hey, this isn't about you. The way you feel right now, the way you had that week happen, all those things. If you just move a little bit, a little sway, a little back and forth, things like that, that is, by the way, that's dancing for white people, like the sway. Like it's kind of a little bit of this. You can do the hitch thing. If you put the hands up, put it out like this. Swaying is dancing for white people. I was told that by my other friends from different communities. So swaying is dancing for white people. You can jump too. That's also dancing for white people. I love that one. We just had a youth conference at one of the churches that we came from. And it's hilarious when you see, 400 young people and they all just do this for about 2 hours. And you're just like, it's worship, but it's just funny that that's the unified thing that everybody does. So number three, dancing. Now, Psalms 149:3, it says, let them praise his name with dancing and make music to him with tambourine and harp. Number three, when it comes to the third part of this is it has to do with our hands. Number one is playing instruments. Now, I'm just going to ask you, as a pastor of this church, leave the instrument playing to the musicians. And let it be on the stage. And my friend, I love her to death, but we had a lady in a previous church that she was the trumpetist in the church, and she had that thing stored right underneath her seat. And anytime God would move, out came the trumpet and blasting, and it was not in the right key, and it was never on time, and it was literally like that moment of expression that was like, oh, God's moving. Why? Because Jill brought out the trumpet. But there are people in this church, and I'm thankful for this, as someone who loves worship dearly, and it's a deep, deep thing that I love in my life, is that we have some incredible musicians, and God's continuing to add to the team and add to the church, and I'm so grateful for every single one of them. And I will just say this, if you have a desire to play instruments, if you have a desire to be on worship, I had a few conversations with you guys over the months, pastor talk. conversations over the last few months, like, man, I'd really like to be involved with that. Let's have a conversation and let's build you a pipeline to get you there. I don't want dreams to die in hopes and wants. I want them to become realities, that if it's something that you would like to be a part of, let's talk about it. Maybe we start you off in kids' church because the presence of God is going to come there, and they need people to lead worship in there just as much, and it's just as important in there as it is right here. One of the things I love about some of our new musicians, they've come to me and they said, hey, if we just need to run over to kids' church to lead a song with my acoustic guitar real fast, I'd be willing to do that. I'm like, yeah, you get it. That's important. That's vitally important. But I don't want you just to think like, hey, this is the worship team and it's only going to be a case. There's a very good reason why Kyle leads worship sometimes and I don't. It's because I'm not the only one that's ever going to be on stage leading worship. There will be others. There will be. And that's why we share the load and those kind of things. Number 2, when it comes to our hands, we clap. This is something I think as a church we're working on. And Leslie, thank you. You're working on it. You're helping us grow. Come on, we're going to get there. We're going to be clappers. We like, yes, exactly. There you go, right? We're going to be clappers. And clapping on time. If you can't clap on time, your pockets are fine. That's fine too. Some people can't carry a tune in a bucket. Some people can't chew gum and walk at the same time. So just know you're forgiven. There's grace there. There's 8 other forms of worship that you can participate in that if clapping doesn't work for you. And number 3 is this, and I'm just going to encourage us all, is lifting of hands. And lifting of hands, if you've been in church at any time for any length of time at all, is simply a sign of surrender. God, come and have your way in my life. And if I love the psalm, and I probably repeat this way too often, but the psalm that's probably my favorite is the one that David says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." And he's literally talking to his mind, will, and emotions and saying, I know right now you don't feel like it. And I know you don't feel like this moment is special for you, soul, but you're going to worship him anyways. And sometimes I come into worship on a Sunday morning and I don't feel like it. Maybe the band's not playing my favorite songs. The worship leader's not wearing the right pair of shoes. Trust me, I've had every conversation under the sun with people. The lights are weird. You got tweaky fog machine going on, whatever it is. But then that moment, you just have to go, God, you're my everything. You're all I want. You're all I need. I worship you with all I have. And I'm lifting my hands instead of it being some sort of spiritual gesture that everybody can watch me do. No, what I'm doing is I'm having this moment in worship. I'm saying, God, come, have your kingdom invade my life. Have your thoughts be my thoughts. Have your ways be my ways. I'm surrendering all. And I know it's hard. And I know it's difficult. But I would just encourage you, in the next few months, just do the meme, right? Where it's like, we've all seen, like, you've got the worship leaders out here, you're carrying a little weight, and then you get a little braver, and you start hoisting the Lord up like this, and you get a little braver, and you do the half mast, then you go all the way, and you lift it up. We've all seen those things, I'm sure, on TikTok. But that is a progression of a disciple, in my opinion. Someone who's trying out, dipping their toe in the water, wanting to get comfortable, going, God, I want more of you, but this is really uncomfortable right now, but I'm going to try. I'm going to get out here. I'm going to do the impossible. And the thing about worship is this, and I'm just going to encourage you with this thought, is that it doesn't matter what's going on in this room or what's happening on the stage. If it's good worship, if it's bad worship, if I forget to turn on my inner pack and miss half the first bar, the first verse, the first song happens like today, God still shows up. And I want to tell this story, and I'm going to wrap it up a little early today because I want to go back into a song. You grab a mic, maybe, because I love you. I used to work a lot at Union Gospel Mission, downtown Portland, Oregon. As you can imagine, it's crazy town. Literally, when in their chapel room, I used to preach once a month in their chapel room. And the chapel room was literally on Burnside and 3rd Street. So Chinatown and Burnside, which is, if you know anything, if you watch the news at all of everything that happened over the last 3 to 5 years or whatever over there, that's where it happened. All the riots, all the vandalism, all the drugs, all the homelessness, all of everything. It's right there. And so the chapel's literally right on that corner. And one side of the chapel is a glass wall 9 foot tall. So they can see everything happening in the chapel. And all the things that are happening. And I had to go down there and I had to preach. And I remember sitting in my seat. And you got to understand, these are drug addicts who are probably no more than a month sober, who are probably tweaking on, needing a hit right now. But they're up there leading worship, and it's not great. It's not good. It's a joyful noise. It's not good music at all whatsoever. But I'm sitting there, and I'm having this moment worshiping. And I'm getting ready to preach, and I just go, God, I actually don't even care what it sounds like. I don't care. What I'm so excited about is that they're trying their hardest. They're running after you with everything. Their life's a wreck. It's a mess. It's destroyed. It's disheveled. And they're just hoping on hope that, God, you might do something. And in that place, I'm telling you, God began to move so powerfully in that room. God began to speak to those guys, began to minister to those people, and began to move in their lives like I've never seen before. And it's one of the most powerful moves of God I think I've experienced in a worship service that was not up to standard by the rest of the world. But it was powerful and it was dynamic. And so what I want to do is I want us to bow our heads and close our eyes. And there's something about worship that requires practice. So as you bow your heads and close your eyes, I want to practice a few of these things today. That as we come into unity as a church, because we understand, okay, this is what the Bible says. I could speak it, I could shout it, I could sing, I could bow, I could stand, I could play instruments, I could clap, I could lift hands. That I'm going to try one of these today, God. You're worthy of my worship because of what you've done in my life, what you've set me free from, what you've healed me from, what you've brought me into. Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Come on, just wait on him.